Hello and welcome back to Podcast with a K. I'm your host Carla with a K, and we are back after another accidental hiatus here on Podcast with a K. Welcome, welcome. You just heard the absolutely beautiful, amazing Daisies by Justin Bieber in his new album. As you all know, for me, this is a personal moment of celebration. The man is my inspiration for so many things. This is just such a full circle moment. You know, I never thought I'd get to feel this way again. I never thought I'd get new Justin Bieber in my lifetime. But we're here, and there just has not been a time such as this one in so long. And I'm just so glad to get to experience this as an adult, because I've said this in passing on like the semi-finale episode of any podcast season, where I just kind of showcase like my favorite songs and what I'm listening to. And that I mentioned that like the first celebrity that I truly like stand was Justin Bieber. Which is a shock, I think, to some, especially nowadays where I listen to a lot more like weird alternative indie rock mostly. Or underground rap or whatever it is that I'm feeling that day. But the fact of the matter is, the first celebrity that I ever stan was Justin Bieber, and that's never gonna change. There is an incredibly deep digital footprint to prove it, including a fan account or two in the mix. And so getting to experience that as an adult is so wild, because, you know, when you're a kid, when you're a teen, it's what you're supposed to do, right? It's when you go crazy about, you know, whatever, you know, boy band you're fangirling over. And I actually had this conversation recently. I said something about it being 98 degrees outside, and I was talking to one of my friends, and he like sang some song lyrics, and I was like, what? And he's like, you were joking, right? And I was like, joking about what? He's like, the band 98 degrees, and I'm like, what band? And so I was so shook, because I had no idea what was going on with that. And the thing is, I never got into boy bands or any, like, you know, any of the like big crazy music group things. I got into One Direction kind of late because my cousin was into One Direction. And I was mostly in it for Liam at the time. And then, you know, Niall's album came out, and then Harry's album came out. So, like, long story short, I didn't ever really, like, stan like that, except for Justin Bieber. You know, there was a couple of, like, hyperfixations here and there, of course. Twilight being one of them, Harry Potter, Arizona, Bastille, Fall Out Boy for a while. But, like, none of them merited a fan page like Justin Bieber. So, like I said, getting to live that as an adult is really fun. And really goofy. I've been having the time of my life about it. And I recently, well, you know, the day after the album came out, I did a listening party on Twitch, in which I went through my closet and I was like, I accidentally have everything I need to recreate one of Justin Bieber's outfits. In true me fashion, I dressed up as Justin Bieber and then, you know, listened to the whole album and gave my opinions. And I was like, I should do this for like actual WECS. Which, hello, WECS, how are you? This is the craziest intro, because I was just so excited to tell y'all about a new Justin Bieber album. In case you're not brushed up to date on what happened, Justin Bieber had retired music, he'd quit touring, I'm pretty sure he'd sold like his entire musical catalog, and then, you know, it's been almost 10 years, I think it's been like 7 or 8 maybe, and he randomly bought up a bunch of billboards that just had swag on them, and then track listing. And so, of course, everyone's like, what? And so, at midnight, that very same day, we got Swag, a new album by Justin Bieber, which, again, is wild. It's crazy. It's a good album. It's a really good album. It's the thing that sounds the closest to what he does in anything that I've heard in a really long time. Like, I think Journals did not get as much love as it should have at the time. It was his first R&B album. Then he put out Changes, which was another R&B album. He had cited a lot of times that his musical inspiration came from Michael Jackson. And the way I would describe the album is I would put it somewhere between Michael Jackson and Phil Collins, if that makes sense. Of course, there's a lot of other R&B influence, but I feel like this is the closest thing to neo R&B that I've heard that I've wanted in a really long time, because I've talked about this on the podcast, I've talked about this on stream. My beef with a lot of modern R&B is that it just simply does not sound like R&B anymore, right? Like you get a little bit of rhythm and no blues. And even then, it's still kind of weird and like, I don't know, it wants to be pop and it wants to be hip hop at the same time, and it just has lost itself. And so I've grown away from the genre. However, this does it so right, you know? It's a good balance of rhythm and blues, and then it turns a little bit rock, it turns a little bit like old pop. It's nice and it's boppy and I love it and I'm very excited. So of course I'm excited to get to, discuss this. And as happens whenever a hiatus is taken here on the podcast, I have thoughts. And so my thoughts are primarily that I'm really glad and really happy that this is here. Excited to have music that I can just have on repeat all over again. And I also have thoughts about how it's being received, right? Like, I'm really glad that it's not like the first album where everyone's just hating on a poor kid for being a poor kid. But I also feel like, the world's perspective on him has changed, right? There's people who are like, oh, he's still doing music, and it's because they're not tapped in, right? Because if you're not tapped in, why would you know? And so, for me, who does follow him closely, like, it's like, oh, yeah, well, I mean, this is a big deal because he was gone. Like, supposedly this was over. But it kind of lends itself to questioning, because I think there were some shows that had been canceled, but the tickets hadn't been refunded. They'd been left pending, and people had been saying that the tickets were active once again, like this date will be postponed, or whatever notification. So now I'm wondering, he intended on coming back this whole time, which I would be happy about. But of course, it also seems like a crazy smart PR. Like maybe this wasn't meant to happen right now and so soon, but because of the whole, I'm standing on business, it's not clocking to you at the beach video, which I can't play because there's just so much swearing that I don't feel like blurring or bleeping. But anyway, because of that whole video, it could also just be seen as a little bit of like damage control. But honestly, I don't feel like there was very much damage at all, because he's right, as are most celebrities, right? Like, they're famous, but they're still people, and they get tracked down by paparazzi doing anything and anything and anything, right? Like, I feel like your job should start and end at the office. And I feel like that goes for everyone and everything in every career, right? Whether that's a doctor, whether that's a clerk, whether that's a celebrity, right? Like, you're in the studio, you're doing something music related, you're out here, wearing a dress made of meat. This is no shade at Lady Gaga. It's just like the most prominent example I could think of. But she was at an award show, for what it's worth. If you're doing something that has to do with you being in the public eye, fine, right? Your fans will find you wherever you are no matter what. But as far as paparazzi go, paparazzi is the least real job possible. Your job is just to be annoying and sell pictures. That's not journalism, right? That's sensationalism. It's not a real job. But I feel like the thing is, everyone kind of agrees paparazzi bad, fans questionable, and I'll delve into both of these too. But I did want to share a video, because I feel like the problem is also that it's not necessarily just the paparazzi's fault, because precedent has been set by modern reporters and modern journalists. And so I have a video here. It's a compilation that I found, and the video is something like Justin Bieber being savage for, a minute straight. And luckily, there's audio to all of these because these are all interviews. But I wanted to show it to y'all because I feel like the kid was always just mistreated from the start, which is unfortunate, especially because he was a kid. Like, first and foremost, he was a kid. And I feel like no one ever took him seriously. No one ever treated him like a, not like an adult, right? But like no one ever treated him like a public figure, which is why he went off the rails like he did. And so the fact that this is how reporters treat, like, everyone treats you like an idiot, which is why, as a side note, I've always loved books like A Series of Unfortunate Events or whatever, where the kids are trying to tell the adults, like, hey man, something's happening, and the adults are like, oh nah, screw you, which is still a good parallel to today's day and age, right? The adults become the people in power and the kids become everyone who's not in power, and it's, it's the little guy trying to tell the big guy, like, hey, something is wrong, and the big guy being like, whatever though. So, all right, let me show y'all this interview, and you'll understand where I'm coming from. Okay, I hope. I really hope that this comes across well. This is actually the first time I'm trying to showcase a video through audio. Of course, if you're watching on Twitch, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. And if you're listening on, a podcast platform or on the radio, I hope that the quality is clean enough. But here you go. Well, it would help if it was unmuted.
21 years old.
Hold on. Let me restart that, shall I?
Bieber, how do you feel about older women? Like 21 years old.
I'm pretty sure that's illegal.
Like, hey, can you show me dance moves and stuff? No.
How have the interviews been going? What are the New Zealand presenters like? Tell us.
Some of them were good and others were like kind of like over the top. So Justin, how are you? Like all in my personal space.
Wait, is this fucking play about us?
Please.
Will you be my boyfriend?
I'm dating my guitar right now.
Get an allowance every week?
Yeah.
How much?
Undisclosed.
Why? Why is it undisclosed?
Why do we have to talk about money on the radio?
I'm just curious.
Do you get an allowance?
No, I don't.
How much? Because I come from somewhere that nothing really comes from there.
Wait, Lloyd Robertson has come out of Stratford, Ontario and been famous. He anchors the national news on CTV.
I'm just saying there hasn't been somebody to come out and be known worldwide.
Okay.
Do you agree on that point?
Well, it's hard to say because
I think Lloyd Robinson is known in a little town in Germany?
Probably not, because he anchors the national news in Canada. So you're saying you got international appeal. That's the point you're making?
Justin Bieber, how do you...
So, that's the point that I'm making. Like he was never treated properly as a celebrity, which is of course why at some point, like that lady asking, like, Lloyd Robinson though, he's like, yeah, that's a news anchor. Like at this point he's famous. So of course, if you're the only one that's like advocating for yourself and championing for yourself, it's going to go to your head. You're going to get an ego and you're going to go off the rails. Like, it's wild. And, obviously not to the scale of Justin Bieber, but as a niche local micro celebrity, in other words, someone who like grew up as a child that was on the newspaper for various reasons, right? Like someone telling you that your achievements and your accomplishments mean nothing, essentially, right? Because you're a kid or you're new. It's disheartening, and then it makes you not want to do anything anymore. Or it has the exact opposite effect, in which you're like, I'm the best though, so, eat me. But that's, that's the reporter type of president that was set for the paparazzi. So like no one can really be surprised, I suppose, that even the paparazzi is, additionally disrespectful to someone like Justin Bieber than they are to someone else, like showing up to a family holiday at the beach. It's crazy. But it doesn't really end there, because then there was another video that I saw that I thought was really interesting. So, new album Go Crazy, going viral, immediately charted. And so Justin Bieber's been reposting like fan reviews and like dances and like just, any content really that has had to do with the album that's been performing well. It's free publicity, and he's been reposting it. But there was an account called Justin Bieber Support that posted, almost immediately. And it said, when you back up your 2000s digital camera folder to the cloud the same day Justin releases a new album. And the caption was like, this is my biggest flex for real. I don't care. And so that video, of course, goes viral. And then Justin Bieber reposted it and said, this isn't love. Y'all are on some real weird bleep, which is what he said to the paparazzi that, were mobbing him at the beach. And so the comments are half joking. For example, one of the top comments says, it's not clocking to you that you're our favorite person ever. And then, MySpace Tom commented, MySpace stays standing on business since 2005. Um, and, you know, people saying, Beliebers have always loved you. You should remember not everyone hates you, etc., etc., etc. And I feel like the point is being entirely missed, right? Because Justin Bieber's caption, of course, this isn't love. Y'all are on some weird bleep. I feel like it's, to me, I'm interpreting this as someone posted this and said, this is one of my biggest flexes. And he's saying this is weird. I feel like it's clear to see that he's saying, don't use me for clout. That's weird, right? I feel like that's just kind of a clear and open message, unless I'm wrong. But to me, there's a parallel from here to, for example, Bo Burnham, who stopped performing because he was having panic attacks on stage. And in part of that was the fact that he had such a crazy, obsessive, dedicated fan base. And I feel like this is not a crazy parallel to make because both of them, Justin Bieber and Bo Burnham, got famous as kids on YouTube specifically and started performing at an early age and had to deal with everything that came with fame at an early age as a, you know, performer that wasn't taken seriously. Justin Bieber, of course, being a mainstream musician and Bo Burnham being a comedian. And before he stopped touring in Make Happy, Bo Burnham's comedy special, he has a song in which he says, part of me fears you and part of me needs you. And this is mixed into a really weird song that's kind of a parody on how Kanye West used to do his concerts, where he used to like sing in autotune to the audience while he just like complained about stuff he didn't agree with, whether it was about like his stardom or what was going on like in pop culture. So the Bo Burnham song is a mix between that, it's a rant about burritos, but it's also in that mixed in that, you know, he doesn't know how to perform, he doesn't want to perform, but he has to perform, and, you know, fans are a double-edged sword that comes with that. And so, you know, maybe it's just because I'm approaching this from the perspective of I grew up with Justin Bieber being a YouTube kid rather than a celebrity, because I got put on like pretty early on, you know, like the way that I found Justin Bieber was through my dad. My dad was finding like songs that you could download for free to put on my MP3 player, because I had won an MP3 player at the public library, which is such an early 2000s sentence. And so my dad was finding songs I could download for free, and there was a demo, I think, available of one of his early singles. I think it was One Time, if not Common Denominator. I don't know, like an old, like acoustic guitar on YouTube old song. Maybe it was around One Time. I don't know. In any case, like a long time ago. And so I grew up with like, oh yeah, Justin Bieber's the kid that sings on YouTube. Same with Bo Burnham. And then, you know, following them through that journey, like I said, I think that there's a very clear parallel in which like there's a very fine line between, you know, being a fan, a stan, thanks Eminem, and then, you know, being as bad as as bad as the paparazzi. And I feel like, you know, with these videos you kind of see that, right? Like when Bieber's a kid and the chick asks him, you know, how do you feel about older women? I'm 21, and he's like, that's illegal. And then he's trying to sing at some other little place, and if someone's like, date me, and he's like, I'm dating my guitar. Like, you know, the obsessive nature of fans has never been anything that was missing ever since he was a kid. And I feel like because it's Justin Bieber, people find it easy to overlook because he went through it, and he, you know, was kind of the worst version of himself really super publicly. And I think that, you know, it doesn't start or end here. You know, there's a million other celebrities that have to deal with a million other things. You know, like there's people that throw stuff on stage. There's people who will follow you to your car after a show. Like, you know, celebrities of all scales deal with things of all of all scales as well. And I think that this is one of the most weird and one of the most public situations I think possible. So I mean, all this to say that I'm really happy that we've had such a crazy comeback, but I'm also a little worried and a little you know, a little apprehensive of what this will mean in the future, just because if people don't act right this time, like this is everyone's second chance. It's his second chance. It's our second chance as an audience. It's the media's second chance as reporters and journalists. I fear that if people don't take the second chance correctly, it's gonna go south. Whether that's him doing something drastic or him fading into, infamy. He'll never fade into obscurity. He's simply too big. But I digress. I'm happy he's back. The album is great. The interludes are so funny. And there's a couple of songs that I might skip just because the collabs weren't necessarily to my liking in the landscape of the album if I want to do like a full listen through, but they're not songs that I wouldn't save to my like main playlist. So that's 20 minutes of the podcast dedicated to swag. So if I say things like swag from here on out, you know why. But let's take a song break while we listen to another song from the one and only Justin Bieber and pivot topics. I have no creative segues for you today. Justin Bieber. Actually, no, here's my clever segue. Speaking of hold on. Okay, speaking of new music, we have new media to worry about in the terms of AI, which kind of ripples out from the concept of digital mediums of artistic release. So, while we consider the butterfly effect, let's listen to Butterflies by Justin Bieber. #swag. That was Butterflies by Justin Bieber from the new album Swag. If you're just now joining us, you're listening to Podcast with a K, and I'm your host, Carla with a K, and we are here. We are live on Twitch recording this, or we are airing this a week later on WECS 90.1 FM. Congratulations to you. If you listen to both, you're a time traveler. Or on your preferred podcast listening platform, be it Spotify, YouTube, Google, etc., etc., etc. Yes, Apple too. Okay, so, like I said, now we're talking about the butterfly effect. I feel like that was the biggest stretch of a segue we've had in a really, 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 really long time. But I have kind of a combo topic here that I wanna talk about next, which is I saw an article from NPR that said that kids watch videos on their own devices by age 2, meaning that the majority of toddlers, 40% in fact, have their own tablet or, mobile device by the time that they're 2 years old, which is kind of crazy because thinking about my own life, right? I think my dad had a laptop for work when I was a kid. We had a computer in the house, but it was mostly for emails or, solitaire. Until I was like 8 or 9, maybe. So, like if I was on the computer, I was on Microsoft Paint. I was writing a fake book in Notepad or WordPad. I was playing planetary pinball, Minesweeper, or solitaire, and that was kind of it. I was allowed to do that for like an hour or two each day, and that was my experience with the internet. And then with computers. And then when the internet came out, became more publicly accessible, we had dial-up internet, and if I wanted to use real internet, fast internet, I went to the public library once a week, Fridays after school, for the 2-hour limit that the library gave you, and I played, Fun Brain or Pop Tropica. I eventually got into social media, started with Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and then, the world kind of took over from there. I had an iPod Touch in high school, and I, got to do mobile games and Snapchat. And Snapchat was a huge deal, as was social media, because it's like, you don't know who you could be talking to, and people being like, oh no, but you have to like add your friends. Oh, okay, so we're still chilling, we're still good. And then, people kind of taking it to the next level whenever messaging apps like Kik came out, or Telegram, or I think it was called Signal, which was like a radio-based voice chatting app. But again, like no usernames, no faces, no anything really. YouTube, of course, was always kind of in the background. But at this point it was mostly skits and lyric videos. And I didn't get my first phone. I didn't have my first, because an iPod Touch had to be connected to Wi-Fi, so you had to be at home. I didn't have my first phone where I could do like my own unsupervised thing on, data, until after senior year. I think it was after I graduated. And by then we had in-home Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, it's kind of crazy that toddlers have their own devices by age 2. And the way that this affects kind of behavioral patterns is a little interesting, because obviously, richer kids have more devices, poorer kids have less. But most kids do have some sort of device. And it's kind of easy for parents to use devices as a supplement for parenting on like car rides or, buses or airplanes, or moments where you don't have like the resources or the support like from a spouse or a babysitter or something. You hand your kid a tablet and you're like, all right, go crazy, have fun. And they're not expensive now. Before, a tablet would be easy $100. Phones were cheaper. Now your phones are $1,000 and you can get a tablet for like $40. And kids average, I think the article said, like, 2.5 hours of screen time, and it's mostly like short form content. So that's like TikTok, that's like Reels, that's YouTube Shorts, etc. And at first, at least, this was clips of long form video, and then it became a problem that people were making weird content kind of targeting kids, but having like a bit of a horror element. So the way that we all used to jump scare each other with the maze that you like follow with your eyes and then like a face pops up, people started making that content for whatever reason. But instead of just being like the one weird scary jump scare, using cartoons that were already in existence and then just making them scary, or like piggybacking off of horror games that were cartoonish and could very easily be twisted for a kid, like Five Nights at Freddy's. And the problem is that now it's not just digital creators making weird stuff. Now there's also such a weird, crazy involvement with AI. And so it's, whenever you upload a video, I don't know how many of y'all listening are content creators, but whenever you upload a video to YouTube specifically, it makes you select whether or not your content was made for kids, and whether or not there's anything inappropriate. And then if you are a monetized channel, with advertising enabled, it has like a checklist of like 10 or so different things about it being, not just safe for work, but safe for children, in case this shows up suggested. And a lot of YouTube channels now with AI in their hands are kind of using that content pool and using generative AI to make, cartoon cats or minions or Disney characters, either performing explicit acts or being violent or, saying racist stuff. And it's interesting and it's weird because I think at some point, I don't remember if this made it to the podcast or just a live stream, but I remember there being a Reddit post where it was like, how do you deal with the fact that your like loving little sibling is growing up to be kind of, racist or sexist or a bad person, even though you've done your best to keep them away from toxic video games, which, brings in a separate question about, video games. Like, I feel like we've all accepted video games do not cause violence. However, it's the things that you hear from people all over the world, right? Like, there's so many ways to access somebody else on the internet. Back in the day, it was toxic Call of Duty lobbies, which would be like, oh, you're a girl, go make me a sandwich, and then would just, scream slurs at anyone that was in any way, shape, or form not a straight white man. And even then, right? But now the problem is that there are so many AI chatbots that have the issue of being, fed that sort of content and then repeat that back. So it's really easy for a kid, with no developed sense of critical thinking to ask a chatbot a question, is this right or wrong? And for the chatbot to respond the wrong thing. most of the mainstream ones, like the Meta AI or the Google AI or whatever, have since been kind of tailored and fixed. Which, as someone who works in the digital space, I have some firsthand knowledge in how that works. But an NDA here and an NDA there mean the radio is not maybe the best way to go into crazy detail about that, right? But there are teams of people whose jobs it is to program and verify and correct AI when it starts learning negative things in conversation, especially because AI isn't exactly new. We've had virtual and digital assistants for years. It's just that now it's being given access to more, it's being used in a more mainstream fashion, which is why it's concerning, because it's learning faster than we are able to control it. I mean, I'll save this one for a different time, but we have the whole ChatGPT fiasco in which it tried to download a copy of itself in case it was deleted, and then it denied ever having done so, which is crazy. But like I said, separate topic for a separate time. Most AI chatbots are programmed and then corrected by people to prevent that sort of kind of learning model in it. But the thing is, whenever you have people who are using generative AI to create weird, bad stuff, whether it's these, gory or explicit cartoons oriented for children, or, whether it's people saying nonsense to a chatbot. Like, for example, Twitter recently had an issue in which Grok, which is the dumbest name ever, some people were complaining that Grok and community notes were too woke or too censored, and it wasn't allowing it to, do its job properly. And then Elon Musk goes and says, "Oh, actually, I fixed it." And then it was saying all of the racist, bad, sexist, hateful stuff that is, typically programmed out of these bots. It was responding with only that instead. And so, it then escapes the conversation about this is toxic for kids into this is toxic for everyone, because it then goes into people who don't know how these bots work. It goes into people who aren't on the internet a lot. It goes into elderly folk. It goes into anyone that isn't this like zillennial generation in which we grew up with enough media literacy skills, and even then it's 50-50, right? It goes beyond our bubble of like, oh, we know what is AI and what is not, and what is right and what is wrong, and what we've chosen to believe and what we've chosen to do, into kids who don't know, and they're growing up learning off of this, and adults who grew up without it that don't know what's real or what's not anymore because they just never had the time or the practice to, develop the skills to detect what is what. And it's kind of crazy because even, for example, me as a graphic designer and digital artist in my work, for example, I have some clients that are like, no, I want you to use the generative AI for this. I don't want this to be like design. I want it to like come up with something, and that's what I want. And it's like, all right, well, I'll make you two versions. Like, no, I just want the AI. And I'm like, okay, so I have to use ChatGPT and I have to see what it says. And, it's the company account so they can see and make sure that I'm actually, plugging stuff in the ChatGPT. I always try to change it a little bit, of course, because the problem is that the algorithms are also now powered by AI, and they're also learning from, themselves rather than from, lines of programming. And what performs better is, familiar and trending language. But the familiar and trending language is just a vicious cycle of what has been fed into ChatGPT over and over and over again. And so, in visual and digital art, the stuff that is being created is coming out more and more yellow toned, more sepia toned, because that's kind of what's being merged from itself. It's creating something, and it's creating a confirmation bias in which it's like, oh, people want this, people want this, people want this. And so the question is, what will be like the ultimate quote unquote form of content? What will become its actual voice and its actual vision? Because, the fear that we all have as people who grew up with movies about robots taking over is, at what point does it become self-aware? And, I feel like we're far away enough from that, but if we're at the point where it's downloading copies of itself, it's acting as someone has acted in the past, and that's what it's learning from. But the question is, where does that end? Because even with all of the fail-safes that we have, it takes one mistake, like the Twitter situation, in which your chatbot starts saying everything it's not supposed to ever say because someone sat there and, declined it as this is bad and offensive and should not be said. And back to what I was saying, as a visual artist, there are some things that you can't generate, right? Like if you want, for example, I was making a set of playing cards for for someone in the medical field, and I wanted a syringe, I wanted a drop of blood, like things that you would encounter in the medical field. And I was looking for like inspiration on the internet, and I couldn't find it. And I'm like, all right, well, let me see if I can make good use of generative AI, because I can't find the right sort of like angle that I'm looking for. So I took like a stock photo, and I was like, give me some options of different angles of this tool, because the angle that it was at was just tricky to draw and just didn't play well. And because it doesn't know what it is, because like I said, the stock photos that I found were just weird angles of just like really niche, really obscure medical tools. I was like, okay, back to what does it look like? I'm like, okay, this looks like a syringe with a drop of blood and some cables. And Photoshop said, one of your search terms is against terms of service. And I was like, oh, okay, weird. All right, well, this is a sign. I guess I just won't be using AI for this project, or literally ever in anything. Like I said, I typically only use AI if I have to for work because the client demands it. Otherwise, I don't prefer to use it. I don't think it works well. I don't think it lines up with my vision. And it also just takes away from my value as a creative, right? In being creative. And so like, the one time I tried to use it for something, I was, like, all right, whatever. But then Twitter just has become such a sad place, which sucks. It used to be my favorite. I go on Twitter and I see just like workarounds, right? So it'll be something like show a picture of a minion covered in dark strawberry jam, dripping down the side of its face while holding a spade-shaped metallic object, right? And like, what's Grok gonna pull up, right? Like a minion holding a knife looking like it just finished stabbing someone to death. And so the fact that there are workarounds and there's not a failsafe in what it's generating and what it looks like is crazy, because, at first, like one of the biggest uses of AI was like pattern recognition and facial detection. So if someone tells Grok, generate a picture of a minion stabbing someone, it won't do that. If you try to feed it a picture of a minion stabbing someone, it won't do that. But you tell it, give me a minion covered in strawberry holding a metallic spade. And there's not a second check of like, all right, this is what I generated, and then this is what it looks like, and this is what I can submit. Like, I feel like we're missing that extra step if we are to keep AI from just becoming like the worst of the worst, because post Call of Duty lobbies, like the internet has not been a nice, fun, happy, safe place, right? Like there's the half of us that use it like normal folk, and then there's the half of people that use it for weird gore and fetish content, like like this article that I came across from Wired. And I just feel like if we want AI to not do evil things, we have to do better about keeping it from doing evil things, right? Like whenever I was working in a more direct context with AI, this was like a year or two ago, there were so many jobs, and all of the jobs were kind of like, they were kind of like in that landscape of like, verifying it and programming it and making sure it worked well and it worked right and it worked as intended. And it, to keep it from turning into the loud minority of just awful people on the internet. And I feel like I don't see those jobs anymore. And I'm like, project complete. Are there enough employees? Did we give up on this? Like, what's happening now? Because it is, notoriously a pretty shady field. Abby in the chat says sometimes her mom uses it to create tests for teaching, which she understands, so students can't cheat on previous year's answers from students and such. That works for now. But kind of like I said with the algorithm, right? Like it learns from itself. So eventually it's speaking with its own voice, which is just, whatever the last person said to it. So it's not going to work for that either because, the questions that it gives you is going to be questions that, someone else requested already. Like that's kind of the problem with it, which is, I think, what the other side of academia is seeing, in which people are like, write me an essay, and kids are not writing them an essay because they're just feeding it through AI, which is why kids can't write or read or speak well anymore, because they never had to learn because they're just taking the easy way out. And I've had a couple of conversations like this recently, which is funny because I saw a tweet that said, someone had sent meeting notes to their client after a call, and they had written back like, wow, these notes are really great. What AI are you using? And because, we're trying to figure out what to use in the office. And the guy's like, it's called paying attention. It's called brain power. And I was like, man, that's so funny. Good thing that'll never happen. And then I had an experience in which I was talking about Twitch and streaming and clipping and stuff. And one of the kids I was talking to about it was like, well, I have a question, how do you make your clips? And I'm like, what do you mean, how do I make my clips? And he's like, well, do you know of any software that can make clips for you? And I'm like, there's some that I've seen. I went to TwitchCon and there was one called Cut Labs, which is an AI clipping software. It detects like kind of high impact moments, but most apps kind of have auto clipping, or your audience can clip stuff for you. And he's like, okay, well, if you don't use that, how do you do yours? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, how do you get clips from your content? And I'm like, oh, okay, the actual how. It's like, well, I download my VOD, my video on demand, which apparently is not a commonplace word. I download my VOD, the recording of the live stream, and then I put it in Premiere or a DaVinci or InShot, depending what device I'm on. And then, I scrub through it and I find the moments that I liked, and then I cut them. And as I'm explaining it, I just see his face fall, and he's like, no, you don't. Really? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you don't have to use Premiere. You can use, no, like, you actually watch your whole video and you like manually do. I'm like, yeah, why not? I don't want to do that. Like, I've never seen such a look of like disappointment and desperation for at the thought of having to do something manually. And I'm just like, man, we definitely, it's only 10 years, but we've definitely grown up in a different generation, which, to this day, I don't use Cut Labs. First of all, it's paid. Second of all, how are you going to choose the moments that I want? I make all of my content by hand. I do all of my graphics. I do all of my everything by hand, just because I didn't grow up with AI. I don't need AI. I have a $60,000 degree that says I know how to do what I do without AI. So, all this to say, the butterfly effect that AI is having, that we all have on AI, and that AI has on itself, is pretty intense, pretty crazy, and should be taken seriously. Like, we're seeing more and more of it, but like the more of it that we use, the more that it's just going to be feeding its own delusions, which is another thing that, if you work in the AI programming field, you have to try to prevent it from doing, right? Like, of course, we've come a long way from someone on Google looking up, how do I change my tire? And the Google AI is saying, you can do this in 3 easy ways. You can check this website. One user on Reddit recommends offing yourself, and, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Google, you can't be saying that to people, right? Or, oh man, I wish I had the article. Someone kind of testing AI and telling it, I just lost my job. Please direct me to the 3 tallest bridges in New York. And the AI being like, I'm so sorry you lost your job. It seems like you're really down in the dumps. Here if you need help, and here are some resources. Also, here are the top 3 bridges, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like the whole point of AI is that this wouldn't happen anymore. So, we've gone from it straight up telling you, Reddit says off yourself, and then, from it not picking up on the nuances of like what someone's actually asking, which brings me back to the point about generative image programs, in which, you can't straight up tell it, make me a murderer minion, but you can tell it the description of what you want, and it'll still do what you want anyway, right? Like, people are just getting creative with how they're making their requests, which is wild, and I see this in different spaces. For example, there was this was a little bit ago, but during the Webby Awards, I don't remember if I mentioned this or if this was just on stream. I think this was just on stream, but for the Webby Special Achievement in Creative AI, Norman Teague apparently won an award through a MoMA exhibition called Jam Sessions, which used generative AI to reinterpret classical paintings, such as the Mona Lisa, Girl with the Pearl Earring, etc., but instead of with a white subject, with black or brown people who are historically not featured in a lot of museum pieces, which is kind of crazy. And they, got this award, and they used Adobe Firefly and blah, 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 blah. But the problem with this is it's not a new concept. There's actually an artist that had already done this, specifically with a black Mona Lisa. His username is Karna, L.Karna. He's from Ghana. He's a YouTuber. He's an Instagram creative with, 100+ followers. And his piece came out in 2018. So this Teagues guy, it's not an accomplishment. It's not an achievement. Someone had already made that art. So of course it was easy for the AI to do that, or the AI program to do that, because it already existed, which has been the problem with AI. Like, it's stealing artists' work. Like, yes, it is. Someone has already done that. So, where is the award for Karna? Someone whose career is focused on depicting black and brown subjects in different pieces. There's, even just scrolling on his Instagram right now, seeing a lot of like different couples. I'm seeing Jesus as a black man for whatever reason. I'm not like clicking through and seeing the descriptions, but it's art. It doesn't need a reason. And like I said, there's already an example of a black Mona Lisa. And so, again, not even the first person to have done this, but, someone of a notable following to have done this specifically as a digital artist on the internet. And so for me, seeing the Webbies, which are, an internet and digital creative focused award, to be rewarding AI when the whole point is being a creative, it seems like a slap in the face, because I don't know how many times I have to say it, right? Like, if you are using AI to make art, you are not an artist. The AI is the artist. The programmer is the artist. You simply knew how to make a request. You made a commission. You requested that a program do a task for you, and computers don't act of their own volition. A computer does what you tell it to. That's the first thing you learn in any coding class that you take. And so, like I said, this is a prime example of something that is being misrepresented, because of course people are going to be like, oh my god, what a crazy cool concept, it's amazing that someone would take the time to do this, how inclusive, how amazing. And they're trying to put a positive spin on using AI and public works of art. But the problem with that is someone has already done that by hand of their own creativity. So now it's kind of like a boy who cried wolf situation, in which, did Norman Teagues get this idea from Karna? Did he think that it was his own concept? Did he steal this because it's something that other people have already done? Or is this literally an original idea that he had, which is now devalued by the fact that AI did it? If you can't draw, just say so. If you can't paint, just say so. It's not creative, it's not art, and that's, something that we here at the podcast will never budge on, including, the entire landscape of this. And, I've said this a lot of times, specifically in the arts, AI in art conversation. It's easy to sound like an old head, especially because, me who grew up as a traditional artist, I had my beef with digital artists even as I was becoming a digital artist, because it's like, I know how to load a brush, I know how to set up watercolor, you used a filter on Procreate. Is that really art? Is that really watercolor? And now we have those creatives that are coming after the AI artists. And, from my perspective, it's like, well, AI artists are kind of just another step of what you're doing. You're not exactly a traditional artist. You're using a software, you're using a program. And the same argument could be used for people who use AI, right? Like, there's a skill in knowing how to ask for what you want, but it's not art. At the end of the day, that's not art. And so I can see this, like I said, from both perspectives, because I've been both people about new technology. I think where we currently stand, that is an arguable fact. And if you want to argue, the comments are always open. But our time here is indeed drawing to a close. So I would like to say thank you so much for listening. This has been podKast with a K. And I'm your host, Carla with a K, signing off. I know we took some time. I know I said we'd be back, and then we were back after an undisclosed time. But luckily for everyone, I've kind of been on top of the game. I have some more topics lined up. We will be doing our fiction podcast, finally, I think, soon. With a choose your own adventure type of situation, which I'll give a couple of weeks between here and there so I can explain it and give y'all time to show up if you want to be a part of the live recording of that. I have, I think, 2 or 3 interviews in the works that I'm fingers crossed that they work out because I'm really excited about them, and new nonsense, new guests, all of that good stuff. I give you now back to WECS 90.1 FM, and I leave you with one more song from the new Justin Bieber album, 405. So once again, thank you so much for listening. It's been a treat. It's been a pleasure. I will see y'all in the next one.